Melanie guided her old sedan down the familiar streets. Bella was in the back seat, humming to herself as she twirled a small plastic doll in her hand. It was a typical day, but Melanie anticipated that it was about to get tougher. To be fair, as a hospital orderly, she didn't usually have the easiest day. She was constantly shuffling between transporting patients, assisting with basic care, maintaining cleanliness, ensuring that medical equipment was in proper order, and assisting the nursing staff. It was a whole lot of things she had to do. Ever since Ellen Howard was wheeled in a few weeks ago, Melanie's workload has somehow quadrupled, like she wasn't having much to deal with already. Ellen was an elderly woman who was critically ill and could barely speak, so she required constant care and maintenance. She pulled up in front of the brightly coloured kindergarten, the small playground already bustling with children darting in and out of view. She turned off the engine and turned to Bella. "All right, kiddo. Let's go." Bella responded with a giggle and slipped out of her seat with the careless grace of a 6-year-old. As they walked toward the entrance of her classroom, Melanie savoured this small pocket of peace before she fully delved into what would be a busy day. It was almost a year since Bella started school, and each day Melanie had to drop her off. It was still hard to let go. They reached the door and Melanie knelt to Bella's eye level. "Be good, okay?" she said, brushing curly tendrils from her daughter's face. The little girl nodded eagerly and Melanie kissed her cheek. Bella hugged her back and excitedly darted inside, her pink backpack a blur as she ran toward her friends. Melanie took a deep breath and returned to her car. The hospital loomed large as she pulled into the parking lot. Its cold grey facade made her miss the warmth of the kindergarten more. Sometimes she thought about giving up, but she needed to keep pushing herself to give Bella the life she deserved. The sterile scent of disinfectant greeted her as she walked into the hospital. Nurses in scrubs rushed past, and doctors barked orders as Melanie hurried towards the staff room, her footsteps echoing in the corridor. In the staff room, she changed into her uniform, grabbed her cleaning supplies and headed to the nurses' station. As she neared the nurses' station, she heard the low murmur of voices. Melanie wasn't one to eavesdrop, but something about the tone of the conversation made her slow her pace, her ears straining to catch the words being said. "Poor old thing," one nurse said, her voice laden with indifference. "They don't expect her to make it through the day." There was a pause and another voice, lower, more serious, chimed in. "Dr. Hitchens has already made arrangements. No visitors allowed. Just make Ellen comfortable until it's over." Melanie's heart skipped a beat. She stopped just short of rounding the corner, her hand gripping the handle of the cleaning cart she had been pushing. The nurses hadn't seen her yet, too engrossed in their conversation to notice her presence. "Isn't that a bit unusual?" the first nurse asked, although genuine concern was missing from her voice. "Keeping everyone away from Ellen Howard like that?" Then she laughed. "But I don't mind because I was getting exhausted." The second nurse shrugged. "I think we can do nothing but wait now." Nothing but wait. Waiting. The word hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Melanie felt a chill run down her spine. She had seen death before. If you worked in a hospital, it wouldn't bother you, but the casualness of this conversation felt wrong. It was as if they were talking about a task on a checklist, not a human life slipping away. Melanie took a deep breath and forced herself to keep moving. As she turned the corner, the nurses glanced at her but said nothing, their conversation cutting off abruptly. Melanie gave them a polite nod and a smile, pretending she hadn't heard anything, but her mind was racing. Why was Ellen Howard being kept away from visitors? It wasn't unheard of, especially with critically ill patients like her, but the way the nurses spoke, it felt strange and calculative. Something tugged at Melanie's gut, but she shook her head and forced herself to focus on her tasks. After all, there was nothing she could do. She was just an orderly, there to clean and help, not to interfere with medical decisions no matter how strange they seemed. As Melanie started cleaning the first room, she pushed the conversation out of her mind. The scent of disinfectant was more pungent now because she added it to her cleaning water, and although she hated it, She had come to associate it with her daily routine and learned to tolerate it. For many of her colleagues, the day's tasks were monotonous, something to get through, but not for Melanie. The job may be stressful and draining, but she revered the act itself, the dignity of this profession. Each room she entered wasn't just a dirty space to clean up. To her, it was a space where people were at their most vulnerable, and it was their duty to make their time in the hospital easier, even if only by offering a kind smile as she worked. And halfway through her round, her colleagues started their familiar banter. "Hey, Mel," Yvette called out with a grin. "You're going to scrub the floors till they sparkle again today?" she asked. "You know this is a hospital, not a 5-star hotel." Before Melanie could respond, another colleague, Diana, did. "She'll probably polish the doorknobs while she's at it." "Thanks, guys." Melanie rolled her eyes. "Can we work now?" She was family to their jokes about her attention to detail. They meant no harm, of course, but they didn't understand her. She would continue to make the patients feel cared for, even in the smallest ways. When she entered the first patient's room, she took a deep breath and set to work, her hands moving methodically as she wiped down surfaces, straightened pillows, and ensured everything was in place. The patient, an elderly man recovering from surgery, offered her a grateful smile. "Thank you, dear. It's nice to have someone around here who cares," he murmured, his voice weak but sincere. Melanie smiled in return, nodding as she finished tidying up. "It's no trouble. You rest up, all right? Let me know if you need anything." The man's eyelids fluttered closed, and Melanie slipped out of the room, her heart warmed by his appreciation. These were the small moments that made her care so much and reminded her that her work mattered. Toward the end of her morning rounds, Ellen's name finally popped on her list. As she approached the room, the conversation from earlier popped into her head, bringing back the unease she felt. The room was dimly lit when Melanie entered. Ellen Howard lay still on the bed, her frail body almost swallowed by hospital linens. Machines beeped rhythmically at her bedside, and Melanie remembered the nurses saying they were just waiting for her death. That was so unfair to say. Ellen looked very fragile, like she was towing the line between life and death. Melanie had been cleaning her room for 1 week, and she had never seen the woman's eye open nor heard her speak. It might be true that she was dying, but to say it like that was unprofessional. Her heart squeezed in her chest as she watched the woman surrounded by machines. She had seen so many patients in similar conditions, but something about Ellen felt different, more fragile, more urgent. Despite Ellen being unresponsive, Melanie quietly approached her bed, not wanting to disturb the cold fragility of the woman. As she reached for the linens to begin her routine, she spoke to the woman like she always did. "Good morning, Ellen. It's Melanie," she said. "I'm just going to freshen up your bed, all right?" With practiced care, Melanie worked quickly, lifting Ellen just enough to replace the sheets beneath her. As she worked, she spoke softly, soothingly, explaining every step and action. "There we go. You've had a long night, Ellen, haven't you?" She chuckled lightly. "I'll make you comfortable now." Melanie finished adjusting the bed and smoothened the blanket over Ellen's small frame. "I'm done now. See you later, Ellen." She was about to turn away when a frail hand clasped her wrist. The touch was light, barely there, but Melanie's mouth fell open. She looked down to see Ellen's thin, wrinkly fingers around her wrist, although her eyes remained closed. "Thank you, Melanie," Ellen whispered, and her hand fell again. Melanie stood frozen by her bed, a lump forming in her throat. There was something about the way Ellen had spoken those 2 simple words. It didn't seem like she was thanking Melanie for changing the sheets. It felt like an appreciation for more. As Melanie left the room, the warmth of their connection lingered. Even as she went about her day doing other tasks, it felt like there was a thread tying her to Ellen, a woman she barely knew. Melanie decided that she would pay extra care and attention to the woman to make sure her final days were spent in dignity and compassion, especially now that she was prohibited from receiving visitors. As she restocked the shelves later that afternoon, she decided to pay Ellen another visit. She was an orderly. No one would bat an eyelid if they saw her enter the elderly woman's room. Throughout the morning, she kept thinking about Ellen's "thank you," and that simple gesture of gratitude felt more significant to Melanie than it should have. Was she overthinking? Maybe, but she couldn't shake it off. Then there was the nurse's conversation earlier, discussing deliberately keeping Ellen isolated, preparing her for an inevitable end. It was hard to ignore it now that there was something wrong. Was it paranoia? Was she reading too much into an offhand comment? Maybe. She wasn't sure, but the pit of her stomach told her there was more to this than meets the eye. When she finished restocking the shelf, she walked toward Ellen's room. When she rounded the corner, she spotted something and slowed her pace, her heart quickening at the absurdity of what she saw. Two people entered Ellen's room, looking around to ensure they weren't seen. Melanie quickly hid herself as their gazes swept up and down the corridor. Of the two people, Melanie recognized one, Dr. George Hitchens. Her breath caught in her throat. He was the head doctor, and he rarely visited patients personally unless there was a significant reason. Not a patient like Ellen. With him was another man, someone unfamiliar but dressed in a suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He looked like a lawyer, and the sight of him sent a jolt of unease through Melanie's body. You rarely saw a lawyer in a hospital and certainly not accompanying a doctor. Something was odd. The hallway was eerily quiet as she tiptoed towards Ellen's room. As she did, questions ricocheted in her head. Why would a lawyer be visiting a critically ill patient with a doctor, especially a patient who had been written off as not having much time left and prohibited from receiving visitors by the same doctor? She reached the display window of Ellen's room and saw Dr. Hitchens and the lawyer huddled over the bed, holding a document and showing it to Ellen. Melanie was surprised to see Ellen awake, and it made her wonder why Ellen was suddenly awake for this meeting when Melanie had never seen her awake all the time she went to her room to clean. Ellen shook her head and Dr. Hitchens started saying something Melanie couldn't hear, but his face was so harsh she knew it couldn't be good. Just then, Ellen turned her head and met Melanie's eyes through the glass. It took Melanie a second to register what was happening, but when she did, it felt like a punch to the gut. Dr. Hitchens noticed and turned, but Melanie got out of the way before they could see her. She raced back around the corner, her heart thudding in her chest. Minutes later, she heard the door slam and peeked to see Dr. Hitchens and the lawyer walking away, smiles on their faces. Melanie waited a few moments after they left before sneaking into Ellen's room. Ellen's frail body lay still on the bed, her chest barely rising with each shallow breath. Melanie was scared they'd done something to her because her skin was ashen, and the faint lines from the window highlighted the deep lines etched into her face. It felt like she had aged 1,000 years since Melanie saw her this morning. "Ellen." She rushed to the bed, feeling disappointed in herself for running when the woman signaled her. Ellen's eyes fluttered open, her eyes glassy with pain. She suddenly gripped Melanie's hand with surprising strength. "Miss Howard," Melanie called when the woman's lips trembled without words. "Do you need something?" Melanie asked softly, despite the knots tightening in her stomach. "What can I do for you, Ellen?" Ellen's head twitched weakly, and Melanie covered the weak hands with hers. Ellen's skin felt thin and papery. Melanie held her breath, waiting for Ellen to say something. Slowly, with great effort, Ellen's lips parted again, and a barely audible whisper escaped. "Please help me. I just signed something and I don't know what it is exactly." Melanie froze. For a moment she thought she had misheard, but Ellen's cloudy blue gaze locked onto hers, desperate and pleading. Her words sent a chill through Melanie's body, and everything suddenly made sense. Dr. Hitchens and the lawyer. They were there to get Ellen's will. Everything from this morning made sense now. The nurse's conversation, prohibiting Ellen from taking visitors. Dr. Hitchens's visit. Ellen's failing health. Melanie leaned in closer. "Your will? Dr. Hitchens has it?" Ellen's eyes fluttered shut for a moment before she nodded weakly. Melanie's pulse quickened, and she stared at the woman. Ellen was asking her to do something dangerous, something that could cost her job and Bella's livelihood. "Please," Ellen raised again, and Melanie made her decision. She patted the woman's hand and smoothed the sheets over her. "Don't worry, Ellen. All right? I'll be back." "Thank you," Ellen said and laid back down, unable to sit upright because she had exhausted all her energy. She walked out of the room wondering what to do. Dr. Hitchens's office was on the top floor, far removed from the low-grade workers like her. She took the elevator to the top floor. Never mind the risks, she would confront Dr. Hitchens herself. Melanie paused outside Dr. Hitchens' office, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Deep down, she really hoped she was overthinking, or that Mrs. Howard was in fact delirious and making things up. Whatever it was, Melanie knew she still had to tread carefully. She knocked on the door and pushed it open. Dr. Hitchens sat at his desk, shuffling through a stack of papers. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face before it settled into a neutral mask. "Hello," he said, his voice measured. "What can I do for you?" Melanie stepped inside, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Hello, Dr. Hickthens. I wanted to talk to you about Mrs. Howard," she said, keeping her tone calm. The name visibly rattled him. He narrowed his eyes, the corners of his mouth twitching. "Mrs. Howard," he repeated as if testing her. "And what business does an orderly have with a patient like her?" Melanie felt a surge of irritation but kept her voice steady. "I've been taking care of her since she was admitted, and I noticed something strange today." "Strange?" Dr. Hitchens leaned back, folding his arms. "Go on." "She's never responded to anyone since she arrived, but today she opened her eyes and spoke to me. She seemed different." Melanie watched his face for any sign of recognition, but he kept his expression blank. "Mrs. Howard told me she'd signed something, but she didn't know what," she continued. Dr. Hitchens's gaze shifted to a yellow envelope on his desk, and Melanie caught the subtle movement. Her heart pounded. "Your name?" Dr. Hitchens asked. "Oh, I'm sorry, it's Melanie," she replied. "Melanie," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're an orderly. It's best you keep to your duties and leave the patient concerns to the doctors." She bristled at his tone but held her ground. "You're absolutely right, sir, but part of my duties is making sure patients get the care they need. And I have a right to be concerned if something doesn't seem right." Dr. Hitchens' face darkened, and he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, icy tone. "You'd be wise to know your place. Stirring up trouble where it isn't warranted can lead to consequences." For a split second, Melanie's mind screamed at her to back down, but the image of Ellen, vulnerable and confused, pushed her forward. Before she could second-guess herself, she lunged for the yellow envelope, snatching it off the desk. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Dr. Hitchens barked, rising to his feet. Melanie didn't answer. She bolted from the room, clutching the envelope to her chest. She skidded around a corner, tearing at the envelope as she ran. Her fingers grasped a thick sheet of paper, and she was just about to flip it over when... Bam! She collided with another orderly, his tray flying. A metallic clang echoed down the hallway as the contents of a bedpan splattered over the paper, seeping into every fibre, obliterating whatever had been on it. Dr. Hitchens was there within moments, his face flushed and furious. He didn't look at Melanie. His eyes were locked on the ruined paper. Without a word, he grabbed a mop that was propped against the wall and swept the soggy mess into a nearby trash bin. He straightened, then turned to Melanie, his face a mask of cold anger. "You're fired," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Disorderly conduct, endangering patients. Get out of my hospital." His eyes burned with hatred, and he turned to the people at the door. "Someone call security, now!" he yelled. Melanie didn't move. Her legs felt rooted to the spot, her pulse hammering in her ears. She had known this moment would come, but it didn't make it any easier to bear. It wasn't long before 2 security guards appeared, their faces expressionless. Dr. Hitchens pointed at Melanie. "Get her out of here, she's fired." The words stung, but Melanie didn't falter. She stood tall, meeting the doctor's gaze as the guards drew nearer. The guards flanked her, one on each side, but they didn't need to use force because Melanie walked out herself, ignoring everyone at the door. At the far end of the hallway, she saw Maya, but ignored her too. The guards escorted her outside the premises. As the hospital doors slid open and the cold afternoon air hit her face, Melanie took a deep breath. Just minutes ago, she'd felt like a hero, taking a stand for Ellen. Now, panic clawed at her chest. She'd been fired. No paycheck meant no way to support her daughter, no way to pay the rent. Dr. Hitchens had effectively erased any evidence there was. She knew it would be nearly impossible to prove anything now. Her thoughts raced, darting from one worst-case scenario to another. The security guards stood there, blocking her path. She took a deep breath, masking her anxiety, and explained, "I just need to get my things and my car keys. I left them in my locker." The guards exchanged a glance, then nodded, allowing her to re-enter under their watchful eyes. They followed her to the employee locker room. As she turned down the hall, her gaze caught on the young receptionist at the front desk, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Melanie seized the moment, walking over to the desk and greeting her with a quick smile. "Hi there," she said, trying to sound casual. "Can I grab Mrs. Howard's file real quick? I just realized I forgot to finalize something in her chart." The receptionist raised an eyebrow but didn't question her. "Sure, one moment." She typed on the computer, then stepped into the records room behind her. By the time Melanie had gathered her things, the file was waiting on the counter. Melanie's heart pounded as she tucked the file under her arm and walked toward the exit. She kept her steps steady, avoiding the guard's eyes. She'd done it. She had Ellen Howard's file. Now, at least, she had something tangible. The next morning, the faded blue door of Melanie's apartment stood ajar as she faced her landlord, Mr. Grant, in the narrow hallway. His tall, broad figure blocked most of the light coming from the stairwell, and he crossed his arms, tapping his foot impatiently. "I can't keep waiting on you to make a decision. Either you agree to the new rent, or you need to start packing," he said, his tone clipped. Melanie's heart raced, but she tried to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Grant, please, you know I can't afford that much. You've already raised the rent twice this year. I just need a bit more time," she pleaded, clutching the edge of the door. Mr. Grant sighed, rubbing his temple. "Times are tough for everyone, Melanie. I have to make ends meet too, and you haven't even paid for this month yet." Melanie looked back into the room. "I'm going to pay for this month in a few days, Mr. Grant. I promise." Mr. Grant breathed heavily. "Tomorrow you're going to pay me tomorrow for this month. Make sure I don't have to call or drop by again. And you've got a month before the new rate. No more, no less," he said, dropping his arms. "You're either paying the new rate or you're out. Understood?" "Yes," she replied, feeling the weight of his words settle heavily on her shoulders. "Thank you. I really appreciate it." As Mr. Grant turned to leave, Melanie's daughter, Bella, appeared from behind her, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. She looked up at her mother with wide, curious eyes. Melanie bent down, her voice softening. "Hey, sweetie." "Mommy, are we moving?" Bella asked, her eyes searching Melanie's face. "Not yet, honey. We've got some time," Melanie replied, giving Bella a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She brushed a hand over Bella's head, sending her off before closing the door. As she leaned against the door, Melanie closed her eyes, trying to calm the rush of panic threatening to overwhelm her. Just 2 days ago, her life had been serene and peaceful. Now she berated herself, wondering why she'd stuck her nose where it didn't belong. She was jobless, with no clear path forward. Yet, she still had Ellen Howard's file with her address on it, a reminder of unfinished business. She tried to resist, but the urge to make things right won out in the end. What Melanie didn't know, however, was that this was far from the end. The next day, Melanie found herself standing in front of a modest, weathered house on a quiet street. She clenched the file in her hands, steeling herself before knocking. Moments later, the door opened, revealing a woman in her 60s. "Hello? Is this Mrs. Howard's home?" Melanie asked, flashing a polite smile. The woman's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Yes, it is. Who are you? I'm Melanie, she replied, holding out her hand. I used to work as an orderly at the hospital where Ellen is currently admitted. The woman's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide with alarm. Is Ellen all right? Yes, she's fine, Melanie reassured her quickly. But you need to get Ellen out of there. Until you do, she will never get better. What do you mean? Her sister blinked, her eyes filling with fear and concern. I can't explain it all. I don't know everything myself. But I know something isn't right. A man visited her. He looked like a lawyer or something. Even the head doctor escorted him. After they left, she kept saying she signed something she wasn't supposed to. I think it's important. Worry clouded Grace's face now. She thanked Melanie and Melanie hurried off. She had done what she could. Now it was up to Ellen's family to take the next step. She had to go pick up her daughter. On the way, her phone lit up with a call from Mr. Grant. It was probably about the rent. It only added to the burden gnawing at her, but she decided not to answer. Her landlord lived far away and wouldn't drive down for a few days, so he could wait. He always called Melanie like this. She was used to his nagging. The following day dawned with a quiet heaviness in Melanie's chest. The cool rays of the early sun filtered through the curtains of her small apartment, casting soft shadows on the wall. She hadn't slept well, her mind running over the previous day's events like a loop that just wouldn't stop. Fired. The word felt final, like a door slammed shut while she was out in the cold, unsure of what to do next. She looked over at her daughter, Bella, who was still fast asleep, her little body curled under her favourite blue blanket, clutching her worn-out stuffed rabbit. Melanie smiled faintly. She would keep things steady for her daughter. That's for sure. She needed to start looking for another job. She had worked as an orderly in that hospital for 5 years, so she had good experience. But she felt she would never be able to use them as a recommendation because her new employer might call. Melanie shook her head. For now, she would focus on Bella. Maybe she will take a few days to rest before starting her job hunting. By the time she dropped Bella off at kindergarten later that morning, the usual noise of children laughing and shouting didn't penetrate her thoughts as deeply as usual. The anxiousness gnawing at her stomach had grown, and as she kissed Bella goodbye, she tried to put on a brave face. Be good, okay? Bella nodded, her face lighting up with excitement. I will, Mama. I'm going to draw you a picture today, with lots of sparkles. Melanie chuckled softly. I can't wait to see it. Now go. As Bella ran off to her friends, Melanie reminded herself that Bella needed better art supplies. Since she was a baby, Bella had always loved to draw. But these days, her drawings were getting realistic and impressive. It made Melanie proud any time. No matter the cost, she would buy her daughter art supplies. It was her duty as Bella's mum to take care of her kid. Melanie returned home, unsure of what to do with the expanse of time on her hands. Usually she would be at the hospital by now, scrubbing down the rooms and offering a warm smile to the patients. She wondered if they would miss her. The absence of routine felt unsettling, like she was adrift at sea with no destination. She sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly tracing patterns onto the worn wood with her finger. What would come next? Would she find another job easily? Or would the stain of yesterday's events follow her like a shadow and make moving forward hard? There was also Bella to think about, her sweet, playful daughter who needed stability. The thought of bills piling up with no income in sight made Melanie's stomach twist. By early afternoon, she decided to pick up her daughter from kindergarten early so they could spend some time in the park. When she arrived at the school, Bella came bounding towards her, face flushed. You're early, Mama, Bella noted, hugging her. You noticed, Melanie laughed. I wanted to surprise you with a walk to the park. Would you like that? Yes, but look what I made you. Bella thrust a piece of paper into her hands, and it was an amazing drawing of Melanie, not professionally done, but impressive for a 6-year-old. Glitter was all over the paper, catching the sunlight. It's beautiful, sweetheart, Melanie said. I'll hold this dear to my heart. I promise. They spent the rest of the afternoon at the park until evening when they had to go. Bella had run and played so much that she was already tired and didn't fuss when Melanie suggested they leave. She sat on the bench and felt lighter than she did for the past few days. She decided to put her worries aside and not worry about how she was going to provide for her daughter, now that she was jobless. She decided to let the universe tell her what to do next. She was making dinner an hour later when a knock sounded at the door. Wiping her hands on a napkin, she hurried over. Opening the door, she was surprised to see a tall gentleman standing outside with a sleek black car parked behind him. "Hello," Melanie greeted, eyeing him curiously. "How may I help you?" "Are you Melanie?" "That depends. Why do you ask?" The man smiled. "I'm Patrick Howard. You may know my aunt, Ellen Howard." Melanie gasped. "Oh, Ellen. How is she?" "Thanks to you, she's doing well. We've moved her home for in-house treatment after you suggested it to my mother," he explained. "When Aunt Ellen got home, she told us all about you." Melanie smiled. "It was nothing. I just did what I thought was right. We love Ellen dearly, so we're grateful. We've also heard about the incident with Dr. Hitchens, and we're planning to take legal action against him and the hospital. In the meantime, Aunt Ellen will need a caretaker at home. You're the only person we trust. Would you consider helping us?" Melanie's mouth dropped open. Was this what the universe was telling her to do? It was crazy how fast things were changing for her recently, but she didn't expect this at all. Things were just too good to be true, but they were true. Of course, there was a catch, which Melanie had no idea about. Before she could respond, Bella appeared at the door and tugged on her shirt. "Mama, who is this?" "My name is Patrick." He knelt to Bella's eye level. "And what's your name?" "Bella." "Wonderful name, Bella." He rose back up. "Also, we'd like to offer you and Bella a place to live with us. We have a large estate and we'll make sure you're both well taken care of. What you did for us is invaluable, and we want to repay you." Tears stung Melanie's eyes. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "This is... Please don't say no. It would break our hearts. We'd be honored to have you join us, knowing Aunt Ellen is with someone we can trust." Melanie laughed softly. This was an offer she couldn't refuse. "Yes," she replied, smiling. "I'll take the job. And we'd be happy to come live with you. Thank you so much." Patrick's smile widened, as if she'd done him a huge favor. "Welcome to the Howard family, Melanie. And you too, Bella. There's a big garden where you can play. You'll love it, I promise." Melanie's heart raced with excitement and disbelief. She quickly grabbed her phone and dialed Mr. Grant. "Hello, Mr. Grant, it's Melanie," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Ah, Melanie?" Mr. Grant replied. "I was just about to call you again. Airatsu, this is about the rent?" "Yes, but actually I've decided to move out after all," Melanie said, taking a deep breath. There was a brief pause on the other end. "Move out?" he repeated. "Why? Is it about the rent? If it is, I can work something out. You can stay for the same amount. No increase." Melanie hesitated, not wanting to explain everything. "I appreciate the offer, but my decision is firm. I need to move." Mr. Grant sighed. "How about this? You can stay for the next 6 months at the same rent. No increases, I promise. You don't have to rush into anything." A faint smile tugged at her lips. She could hear the desperation in his voice, but the thought of the new life waiting for her and Bella was too good to pass up. "That's kind of you," Melanie said, "but I have to move. It's what's best for us." Silence lingered for a moment. Then Mr. Grant's voice softened. "All right. I understand. I'm sorry, Melanie." She blinked, caught off guard by his sudden sincerity. "Thank you, Mr. Grant. I appreciate everything." "Good luck with wherever you're going," he added quietly before hanging up. For Melanie and Bella, the move to the Howard estate was like stepping into a new world. For all its size, the house didn't feel cold or distant. It felt like home. "Mama, look!" Bella squealed, standing by a window. "I can see the garden from here." Then she turned to Melanie, her face flushed with happiness. Can we stay here forever? We'll see, baby, Melanie hugged Bella. The salary that was offered to her was outrageously high, and she planned to save aggressively to have something to fall back on in case something happened. This sudden shift in their lives was tremendous, and she felt a sense of peace, but she couldn't help but wonder when it would all change. Ellen was still weak, but she no longer looked like the frail, neglected woman Melanie had found in the hospital. When they met, Ellen reached out, holding Melanie's hands tightly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Melanie," Ellen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't believe you stood up for me like that at the hospital. I was so scared no one would ever listen." Melanie gave her a reassuring smile. "You deserve to be heard, Ellen. I'm just glad the head doctor is finally going to face consequences for what he's done." Ellen nodded, a fire sparking in her eyes. "It's about time. He and that lawyer, they tried to make a fool out of me. They thought I wouldn't notice or understand." She took a deep breath as if gathering strength. "Do you know what they tried to pull?" Melanie leaned in closer, curious. "What did they do?" Ellen's face grew serious. "They had me sign papers, but they didn't tell me the full story. I found out later that, in case I didn't make it, my will would supposedly leave everything I own to some private fund. I never agreed to that." Melanie's eyes widened in shock. "A private fund? How could they—" "They're ruthless," Ellen interrupted, her voice trembling. "I had no idea what I was signing until it was too late. They didn't think I'd figure it out, but they underestimated me." "Well, they won't get away with it now," Melanie replied, squeezing Ellen's hand. "We're going to make sure they're held accountable." Ellen's lips curved into a small, determined smile. "With your help, I know we will. I'm not going to let them take anything from me ever again." Ellen's health seemed to improve, slowly but steadily. Her cheeks were beginning to regain a hint of colour, and her voice, though still soft, carried more strength. Melanie was by Ellen's side through it all, tending to her every need. Ellen would often look at her with love and appreciation, her thin fingers reaching out to gently squeeze Melanie's hands. "You have a gift, you know," Ellen said one afternoon, a few days after Melanie became her official caregiver. She had just finished reading Ellen a book, and the older woman looked happy. "What gift?" Melanie asked, setting down the book. "Your nurturing spirit," Ellen said. "You're so caring. It's so rare these days to see someone so kind." "Come on," Melanie blushed. "I'm just doing what anyone would do." Ellen shook her head. "Not just anyone," she said. "I wasn't responsive due to all the drugs they pumped inside me, but I was aware of my surroundings. I always looked forward to your visits because you were the only one who talked to me." "I didn't know that," Melanie said. "And that's what made it so beautiful," Ellen chuckled. "You weren't doing it to impress me. You did it because it's who you are." She glanced over at the older woman, noting the slight smile on her face, and felt a warmth spread through her. It was moments like these that made her feel at home. There was something that bothered Melanie, though. Since moving in to help care for Ellen, she hadn't seen Grace once. She'd thought it odd. After all, Ellen was going through a rough time, and Grace had been her only family until Melanie arrived. But she hesitated to bring it up. Maybe there were family reasons she didn't know about, reasons that kept Grace away. Just then, Melanie heard a faint creak from the hallway. She looked up, startled, and saw Patrick standing there, holding a bouquet of roses. His sudden appearance caught her off guard, and she fumbled with the book before closing it. "Patrick," she said, feeling her cheeks warm. "I didn't hear you come in." He grinned, stepping forward and offering her the roses. "Surprise. Thought I'd bring something back from my trip," he said, his gaze warm and lingering. "For you." She took the roses, inhaling their delicate fragrance. "Thank you, Patrick. They're beautiful." She glanced down at the roses, noticing the softness of the petals. She hadn't expected him to show her such attention. Yet it wasn't the first time. Little gestures here and there had hinted at something more than mere friendliness. He sat down across from her, loosening his tie. "How have things been while I was away?" I hope Ellen wasn't too much trouble. And Melanie shook her head, glancing at Ellen, who was dozing peacefully in her armchair. No trouble at all. We've had a nice time together, actually. She's been more responsive lately. That's good to hear, he replied, his gaze drifting back to Melanie. I'm glad she has you here. It's nice to come back and know everything's in good hands. Melanie smiled, feeling a flutter in her chest. I'm just glad to help. Patrick leaned forward, his expression softening. You know, I'm really grateful for everything you're doing here. Ellen seems happier, and I'm happy you're here too, Melanie. She felt her heart skip a beat. There was something about the way he looked at her, a warmth that made her wonder if there was more to his kindness. Thank you, Patrick. I really appreciate it, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The room fell into a comfortable silence, with both of them avoiding the obvious question hanging in the air. Melanie felt a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. She wasn't sure how to respond to Patrick's growing attention. He was handsome, charming, and generous. But there was something that she wasn't sure about yet. Melanie was walking through the hallway one day when she heard Patrick's voice around the corner. She stopped, realizing he was on the phone, his voice low but clearly frustrated. I'm doing my best, Mom, he said, the words laced with tension. I think we're almost there. Melanie felt a knot form in her stomach. She knew she shouldn't be listening, but the tone of his voice rooted her in place. There was a pause, and then he spoke again, this time softer, almost as if he didn't want to be overheard. She's just not getting my hints, I guess. Melanie's heart sank. It was clear they were talking about her, but why was he telling his mum? She stood there, a mixture of embarrassment and anxiety coursing through her. After a few seconds, Patrick's voice lowered even more, and Melanie couldn't make out the rest of the conversation. She quickly turned away, hoping he hadn't noticed her lingering nearby. Melanie's heart sank as the realization dawned on her. Patrick's gestures, his gifts, even his lingering smiles, they had all seemed so genuine, but now she could see through them, like threads unraveling before her eyes. It all made sense. Patrick wasn't interested in her. He was interested in what she represented, someone who was close to Ellen, someone who could influence her. The next day, as she sat with Ellen in the living room, Melanie couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She had allowed herself to be charmed, drawn in by Patrick's kindness, believing that he might be interested in her for who she was. But now she felt a dull ache at the thought that he had been playing a part all along. Melanie decided to ask Ellen to tell her more about her past. Ellen's eyes sparkled as she told Melanie stories about her younger days, working tirelessly to build a life for herself. But there was always a shadow that passed over her features when the conversation turned to family. I always thought that I'd settle down one day, Ellen confessed, her voice wistful. But the years went by and I was always so busy. When I finally had time, I was older and it just didn't happen. Melanie took a deep breath and asked, Do you ever think about what you want to do with everything you've built? With your fortune? Ellen laughed, shaking her head. My sister and Patrick seem to think about it a lot more than I do, she replied. Her eyes grew serious, and she wiped at her face, almost as if brushing away a bothersome thought. Sometimes I think about giving it all away. I'd rather see it go to people who would really appreciate it, you know? That evening, as Melanie reflected on everything she had learned, she resolved to stay by Ellen's side. Patrick and Grace might think they had Ellen's best interests at heart, but Melanie saw something they didn't, and she would be there to protect Ellen from those who saw her as a means to an end. A few days later, Melanie felt a surge of determination as she slipped on a pair of large sunglasses and tucked her hair under a hat. Disguised as best she could, she walked through the familiar hospital corridors where she once worked. She kept her head low, her heart racing as she approached a few of her old colleagues. Hey, it's been a while, she said softly to Jessica, an orderly she'd once worked closely with. They exchanged a quick hug before Melanie leaned in closer, keeping her voice barely above a whisper. Listen, I need to ask you something. Has Dr. Hitchens been investigated at all? Anything unusual going on? Jessica frowned, shaking her head. No, not that I've heard. Why do you ask? Is everything all right? Melanie forced a smile, trying to mask her disappointment. Yeah, just curious. Thanks for the update, though. Take care. Over the next few days, Melanie pieced together what little information she could from her remaining contacts. It seemed that Dr. Hitchens was operating without a shadow of suspicion. Frustrated but undeterred, she decided to take matters into her own hands. One evening, Melanie positioned herself in a borrowed car outside the hospital, waiting for Dr. Hitchens to finish his shift. She had a gut feeling, a hunch that if followed, might lead her to the answers she needed. She watched as he finally emerged, walked to his car, and drove off into the fading light. She carefully pulled out after him, keeping her distance as he wound through the streets, his destination still unknown to her. After a few turns, Melanie's heart skipped a beat. She knew the area well, and a creeping suspicion started to form. She felt a sense of unease as Dr. Hitchens turned onto the street where Grace's house stood. When he pulled into Grace's driveway, Melanie's mouth dropped open. She parked her car a few houses down, peering over the dashboard as he stepped out, straightened his tie, and walked to the front door. The door opened, and there stood Grace, welcoming him inside with a smile. Melanie watched in stunned silence, everything finally clicking into place. For a moment, Melanie sat in her car, heart racing as she absorbed the implications of what she'd just witnessed. She now knew they weren't just trying to manipulate Ellen separately. This was a coordinated effort, a family affair with Dr. Hitchens woven into the mix. Melanie paced her small bedroom, chewing on her fingernail as she weighed her options. She knew the stakes had just gotten higher. Without evidence, her suspicions would be nothing more than hearsay, easily dismissed by Patrick and Grace. And with Ellen's age, they could easily claim she was confused or suffering from memory issues. If she was going to protect Ellen, she needed help. Someone with experience, someone who knew how to gather proof. Her mind drifted to Mr. Grant, her old landlord. He wasn't just a grumpy property owner. He'd once been a criminal investigator, and he had a knack for finding things people wanted to keep hidden. With a surge of determination, she grabbed her phone and dialed his number. Melanie! Mr. Grant's familiar gravelly voice came through the receiver, a hint of humour lacing his words. I had a feeling I'd be hearing from you. Thought maybe you were coming back to rent the place. Melanie let out a small laugh. Not yet, but who knows? I might need it sooner than I thought. Ah, is that so? He replied, a touch of curiosity in his tone. So, what's this call about then? She hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Let's just say it's not about rent. And, well, it's not something I can explain over the phone. Can we meet in person? A few days later, Melanie arrived at a small cafe on the edge of town. She spotted him in the corner, already nursing a cup of coffee, his sharp eyes scanning the room as if he was still on duty. Mr. Grant, she greeted him, slipping into the seat across from him. Melanie, he nodded, studying her with a curious glint in his eyes. So what's this all about? You've got me intrigued. Melanie took a deep breath, then leaned in closer. It's about my employer, Ellen Howard, her sister Grace and nephew Patrick. I think they're up to something that could hurt Ellen. She exhaled slowly. I need help gathering evidence. I think they're after Ellen's money. She's been talking about how they've been pestering her about what she'll do with her fortune, and I think they're trying to manipulate her into giving it to them. Mr. Grant nodded, his expression serious. All right, let's say you're right. You've got a real fight ahead of you, Melanie. But I've been around long enough to know when something smells rotten. I'll help you, but we're going to have to be careful. These people won't take kindly to being exposed. Melanie felt a surge of relief and gratitude, giving him a small smile. Thank you, Mr. Grant. I don't know what I'd do without you. He grunted, waving her off with a smirk. You're not getting rid of me that easily. Now let's figure out how we're going to nail these folks to the wall. Melanie sat across from Mr. Grant in his small, cluttered office, the faint hum of a police scanner buzzing in the background. She had explained her plan, and now they were going over the final details of how to bring Grace and Dr. Hitchens to justice. Mr. Grant leaned back in his chair, nodding thoughtfully. All right, so we've got Grace's movements tracked. She's meeting with Dr. Hitchens at that cafe every time something happens with Ellen. They're definitely in this together. Now we just need a way to get them to spill the beans. Melanie leaned forward, excitement tingling in her veins. Ellen mentioned once that she was thinking about giving her fortune to charity. I thought maybe she could bring it up in front of Patrick, just enough to rattle him. That should make him run to Grace. Mr. Grant rubbed his chin, a grin spreading across his face. That's good. Real good. If Patrick thinks Ellen's about to hand everything over to some charity, he'll run straight to his mother, and she'll need to confer with her accomplice. Then we can catch them red-handed. So, we set up cameras and recording devices at the cafe, Melanie suggested. We've already tracked their meeting spot. If we plant them right, we'll have solid evidence. Mr. Grant nodded, already reaching for his phone. I've still got a few friends in the police department who can help us set it up. If we do this right, we'll get all the proof we need. A few days later, the trap was set. With Mr. Grant's connections, they had managed to rig a small section of the cafe where Grace and Dr. Hitchens regularly met. Tiny cameras and microphones were discreetly hidden, waiting to capture their conversation. That evening, Melanie stood by Ellen's side in the living room, ready to put her plan into action. Patrick was due to arrive any minute. Melanie gave Ellen a gentle nod, and Ellen smiled, understanding what needed to be done. When Patrick arrived, he entered the room with his usual smile, but Melanie could sense the tension beneath his calm demeanour. She waited until he was seated before nudging Ellen to speak. "Oh, Patrick," Ellen began, her tone light. "I've been doing some thinking lately. I'm getting older, and I'd like to make sure my fortune goes to a good cause." Patrick's face froze for a moment, and Melanie noticed his hands clenching slightly. He forced a smile. "Oh? What kind of cause, Aunt Ellen?" Ellen leaned back, feigning casualness. "I've been considering a few charities. You know, for people like me, people who've worked hard and never got the chance to start families of their own. I think it would be nice to give something back." Patrick's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "That's very generous of you, Aunt Ellen, but wouldn't it be better to keep it in the family?" Melanie suppressed a smirk as she saw Patrick's discomfort. She watched him carefully as he exchanged a few more strained pleasantries with Ellen before excusing himself. As soon as he was out of sight, Melanie grabbed her phone and called Mr. Grant. "He took the bait. He's on his way to Grace." "Good," Mr. Grant replied. "Everything's set up at the cafe. I'll meet you there." From a discreet corner of the cafe, Melanie and Mr. Grant watched as Grace arrived, her face pinched and anxious. A few minutes later, Dr. Hitchens appeared, sliding into the booth across from her. Grace leaned forward, her voice barely a whisper but caught by the hidden microphone. "She's talking about donating everything to charity. We can't let that happen." Dr. Hitchens scowled, shaking his head. "We need to act fast. If we don't make our move soon, everything we've worked for will be gone. Do you still have access to the legal documents?" Grace nodded, glancing around nervously. "Yes, but we'll need to get Ellen to sign them before she makes anything official." The conversation continued, with Grace and Dr. Hitchens mapping out their scheme, unaware that every word was being recorded. Mr. Grant shot Melanie a satisfied smile as he checked the footage on his laptop, ensuring they had everything they needed. When the meeting ended, Grace and Dr. Hitchens left the cafe, still oblivious to the trap that had been sprung. Melanie felt a sense of triumph as she and Mr. Grant packed up the equipment. "It's over," Mr. Grant said, his eyes gleaming. "We've got them." Melanie nodded, relief flooding over her. Ellen was safe now, and thanks to Mr. Grant, they had all the proof they needed to bring Grace and Dr. Hitchens to justice. Melanie stood in the corner of Ellen's living room, her arms crossed, head tilted low. The room was tense, heavy with the weight of what was about to unfold. Suddenly the door burst open and police officers entered, their voices echoing through the house as they announced their presence. Patrick looked up, his face blanching as he processed the scene. "What? What's going on?" he stammered, glancing wildly between Grace, Dr. Hitchens, and the officers. Grace, usually so composed, was frozen, her mouth agape. Dr. Hitchens's eyes narrowed, his gaze darting to the officers as he tried to understand what had just happened. They all looked at Melanie, standing quietly in the corner, and realization dawned on their faces. "You!" Grace hissed, her face contorted with rage as she pointed a shaking finger at Melanie. "You did this! You wretched, lowly... Ugh! I wish you were dead!" Melanie lifted her head, a small, satisfied smile playing at the corner of her lips. Dr. Hitchens met Melanie's gaze, and for the first time, there was a flicker of fear in his eyes. He finally understood that she was more than just a quiet presence at the hospital. "Well played," he muttered, his jaw clenched. Then Patrick stepped forward, his face a mixture of disbelief and desperation. "Melanie, I trusted you. I brought you into this house. I cared about you, showed you attention. I was ready to love you. Doesn't that mean anything?" Melanie sighed, meeting his pleading eyes. "You're right, Patrick. You did give me attention, and you acted like you cared. But it was all an act, wasn't it? You were just trying to use me." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You don't know the meaning of real love or care." The officers moved in, placing cuffs on Grace, Dr. Hitchens, and Patrick. "You're all under arrest for conspiring to harm Ellen Howard," one of them announced, his tone firm. "You have the right to remain silent." As they were led out of the house, Grace threw one last hateful glare at Melanie. But Melanie simply stood there, unmoved, watching as they were taken away. A few days later, Melanie sat with Ellen, Mr. Grant, and her daughter Bella in Ellen's cozy living room. Ellen took Melanie's hands, tears welling up in her eyes. "You've done so much for me, Melanie. I want you and Bella to have my estate. It would make me so happy to know it's going to someone who truly cares." Melanie squeezed Ellen's hands, shaking her head. "Thank you, Ellen, but I don't need it. I'd rather live a simple, hard-working life. Big fortunes. They don't lead to happiness. I've seen that firsthand." Ellen's tears spilled over and she pulled Melanie into a gentle embrace. "You're too good, Melanie. People like you. You're a rare gift." Mr. Grant chuckled, his eyes twinkling with admiration. "Well, I've had a lot of tenants over the years, but none like you, Melanie. You make me proud." Ellen and Mr. Grant shared a warm glance, and Melanie sensed something deeper between them. She smiled, watching as Ellen blushed, and gave Mr. Grant's hand a shy squeeze. It seemed Ellen's days of loneliness were coming to an end. A week later, Melanie was back at the hospital, her position restored and her spirits high. She was renting Mr. Grant's apartment again, at the lower price, of course. Life had returned to a comforting routine, but with a renewed sense of purpose. That afternoon, she took Bella to the park, the late summer sun casting a warm glow over them as they sat on a bench, watching the children play. Bella turned to her, her small face serious. "Mum, you're my hero." Melanie's heart swelled as she looked at her daughter, her eyes shining with love. She pulled Bella into a hug, holding her close. She realized in that moment that no fortune, no amount of wealth, could ever be as precious as the love and admiration in her daughter's eyes. And that, Melanie knew, was worth more than anything money could buy.